Who do you think I should ask next?
Two people from the Agile Alliance board. So Ellen Grove, I've worked with Ellen. I've been with her the past 3 years on the board. She was our interim managing director for a period of time. That is Ellen. Definitely just someone I really respect and admire in the Agile space. I've been so fortunate to work with her for the past 3 years. So really would be really great to have on the show as well. Like I said, she
And a
steps
wonderful
in
person. Yeah,
just incredible, right? Yeah.
So this is a picture from her in Agile India when with my daughter. It was a wonderful experience for my daughter speaking at the Agile conference, but it was also wonderful because of people like Ellen, who really just, well, I don't know how to say it, but that she really took the time also to talk with her and to consider her as a normal speaker, and
Yeah.
which it was in a sense, but it
Yeah.
was really like, okay, making sure, okay, so now you need to be your part of the Agile Alliance, your membership, and all these kind of things. So she's really treating everybody as a normal person, and with respect and all kind of things. So that was, that's Ellen.
That's Ellen.
Who do you think I should ask next?
So that's Ellen Grove, and Ellen's another one. I've known her for quite a while. I met her at a conference in Canada. So she was the interim executive director of the Agile Alliance for a couple of years, fairly recently. Again, has a really kind of has a lot of experience. Ellen is one of the people that really kind of introduced me to Lego play and kind of that area of coaching. And I like her energy. I like her outlook on things. And again, she's someone that I've just been able to learn a lot from. And she's just a great person. Another one that I think would be really good to talk to. I think you'd get some really interesting perspectives, just because of where she comes from and what she's done.
Hi. Today's interview is with Ellen Grove. We talked about the differences between cooking for 2 or 8 people, designing online experiences, and learning at a young age about people and their capabilities. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of Agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button, because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone, and hello Ellen. Ellen Grove. We're here, and I want to show, when I say here, I'm in Belgium. And Ellen, you're, oops, and somehow my mouse pointer won't help me. Ellen is in Ottawa in Canada, I think. This is where you are, and it should move to where you are, more or less. Of course, the goal is not to have help stalkers. And on my side, it's 17:46 on a Sunday evening. And what's the time on your side?
It's just coming up on noon on Sunday, so it's a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon in early April right now, which means spring is coming, and we're just getting rid of all of the snow here. I'm about 40 minutes drive south of where the point on the map was, a little bit closer to the US border, but in a snowy part of the world. And it's very exciting when the days get longer and the snow melts and things start to turn green again.
It's interesting that you talk about spring, and because indeed, if you're from this part of the world, I would say indeed April starts at spring, but I didn't make the connection with still having snow. I was talking with someone else earlier this week that was from New Zealand, and there she was talking about January, and January was summer. I was like, oh yeah, of course. There is the other part of the world where the summer is actually in January. But for us, the summer, on our part of the world, the summer is more July, August. I think that's the same on your side, Kendra.
Absolutely. It's funny with all of the time shifting and connectivity that's come about from working in a more way. That's the part that I still can't get my head around, the reversal of the seasons, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time in the Southern Hemisphere yet. And so maybe that'll stick. Maybe that'll stick at some point. But at the moment, it's yay, it's spring. The days are getting longer. There will be grass soon. We can shed the winter coats. It's exciting.
Yeah, I'm already happy if I more or less get my head around the time zones and the seasons is something completely different. Anyway, we jumped right into that. Ellen, for the few people that don't know you, tell us a little more about who are you?
Sure. Well, my name is Ellen Grove. I'm an Agile coach, a facilitator, a trainer. I usually put in that list, although I haven't done any training in a while, what with the way the past few years have gone. Organizational change agent. I live just outside of Ottawa, Canada, with my husband because my kids have grown and moved out and are adults now, which is another thing that I'm still trying to get my head around. It's sort of wild. I don't know how that happened so quickly. But the other thing that I'll just mention by way of introduction, because it's probably stuff that we're going to talk about a little bit later, is the things that I get really excited about in the context of agility. And the things that are kind of exciting me at the moment are, how do we bring playfulness into doing our work? How do we bring play back into how we interact with each other? And another idea that I'm really excited is about open space and the applicability of open space principles in a larger sense in the work that we do. Because that's
I want to go a little bit to the playfulness, because do I remember correctly that you're also a Legos serious play facilitator? Is that something that I remember correctly from you?
Absolutely. I am a Lego serious play facilitator, and it's something that when I first discovered it, I was just mind blown about how you could use this very playful and what seems like kind of a silly technique in a workplace context. We're going to talk about using Lego? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But it is an incredibly powerful tool for getting to the heart of conversations really quickly. And that's another thing, again, with the shift to remote working. I'll say I haven't had as much chance to use Lego as I would have liked to. I've done a couple of things with Lego in the past. It's actually been in the past 6 months, I guess, as the world is starting to reopen and people are getting back together. And it's always amazing to see the conversations that happen when you sit people around a table with it's structured conversation because there's specific questions that we're working our way through. But when you're engaging your whole body in building the answers to questions, when you're having fun with it, the kinds of conversations that it sparks up are just incredible. You get people having these really heart-to-heart connections very quickly. You hear from people who wouldn't speak up otherwise. It's a magical tool. And I overuse the word magical when talking about Lego serious play, and it's also not really magic. It's kind of based on science, but it's an incredible tool for facilitating conversations.
Yeah, I really like it. I'm not an official Lego facilitator, but I've been in lots of trainings with official facilitators, and I've used Lego in other kind of things. But yeah, just that yeah, like you say, that scientific thing about and using it and having people use their hands while answering questions and trying to figure out, not knowing the answer, building something, and then all of a sudden being able to explain it in a way that they say, wait a minute, did I just build that? Did I just say that? And where did that all come from? I thought I was just fooling around with Lego, and all of a sudden it's the power and the shift that you have. I really like that you also mentioned the fact that other people are speaking up. It's incredible how this kind of activates other parts of the brain, and for other people that works better than for people that are usually speaking up. It might work a little less, not always, but it gives a completely different dynamic in a group, I would say.
It really does. It's an incredibly powerful facilitation technique in the way that it levels the playing field for everybody to jump into the conversation. It gives people a different medium for expressing their thoughts. It allows for humor and playfulness. Like I've seen some pretty dark ideas represented with a lot of humor using Lego. Like my kid has skeletons and spider webs and whips and things. And it's interesting to see how those end up on the table. And for the people who are, as you say, the people who are used to talking, I'll be quite blunt, dominating the conversation. Sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, but it gives them the opportunity to actually listen to other people and to see how their ideas fit in with other people's in a way that doesn't necessarily happen if you're just talking about ideas, sitting down and talking. And I've seen people nearly brought to tears when we've been having conversations in Lego Serious Play. That, in fact, happened the very first time I went and I facilitated a Lego Serious Play conversation. We were doing sort of a Johari window kind of exercise, and there was at least one table in the room where they were all on the verge of tears with the conversation they were having. And it was just like, whoa, how did that happen? How did that happen? And of course, as a facilitator, you need to be prepared for when emotion comes into the room. But using Lego Serious Play and using other playful techniques brings emotion into the room away a lot more of the, I want to say, analytically based ways we have of let's gather around and get our ideas on the table and have a discussion, do the pros and cons, and we'll do a SWOT, we'll do whatever, and we'll figure out where we go from there. The reality is people are emotional creatures, and a lot more of how we make decisions and is based on how we feel about things, not necessarily how we think about things. And I think that's something that, especially as Agile practitioners, we really need to be aware of, because people who work in tech, people who work in tech, and especially the tech sectors I've been working a lot in lately, which have been like finance and telecommunications and things where, it draws a particular kind of mindset. We like to think we're very analytical, very data-driven, very rational beings. And humans are not. Humans are not rational beings for the most part. And the more that we are aware of that, we can use that together.
Yeah, and usually these kind of companies, they think even if they kind of rationally know that emotions are important, they don't have the tools to bring emotions back. Either the emotions blurt out in sometimes a negative way. And for me, Lego Serious Play is one of these techniques where you can bring emotions and talk about it and have them have it in, I would say almost a rational way. But of course, emotions are never in a rational way. But you have a way to talk about it and to make it less toxic and let people listen more to each other, instead of, because otherwise, when people have really hard emotion, people might be shouting or might be crying, but in a way that people don't listen. And in the way you explain it with the tears, it's really much more about feeling what's just been said and what's happening there. So thanks for sharing that, because we jumped right into already one of these techniques, but I really like this technique, and I kind of knew that you knew a lot about it, so I'm happy that you wanted to share some of that knowledge. But let's go to that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you and who you are?
So I think the thing that most people professionally don't know about me is I come from a pretty unusual family background. Like I grew up in a fairly middle-class home outside of Ottawa, outside of Toronto, but I was the second oldest kid in a family of 8. My parents who met at a computer show in 1964, by the way. And I always thought, I'm never going to go anywhere near computers. That's not what I'm interested in at all. And then this is the way the world works. But they always thought that they would have 2 kids and adopt 2 kids, because my mom came from a family where she had adopted siblings and her parents were foster parents as well. And anyhow, my parents had 2 kids, and then through one thing or another, adopted 6 kids. And so I have siblings who are like, it's a multiracial family. I have siblings who have a variety of, I'm going to use the words developmental disabilities. There's probably different language that we're using in different parts of the world. But like I have 3 siblings who have Down syndrome. It was a very unusual family background. And I was the second oldest in all of this. So,
that's just also to say that's also, well, we're both of us were not in our 20s anymore, so that's some years ago. I can imagine that these days there's more people talking and doing these kind of things, but back then I would say that was very unusual. Or do I see that wrong?
I think the size of the family is still pretty unusual these days. In
Oh
that
yeah,
we had
definitely.
we had 8 kids in our family, and I can't think of a single family I know these days that's that large. I know people who have 4 kids, and that's considered huge. Um, by modern standards, but it was a very different kind of upbringing, and that I'm gonna be quite blunt and say it was still pretty privileged. We lived in a really nice part of town. I went to a good school, all of those things, but uh, what my family did, how we acted, things that we did were a little bit different. I think sort of the decision making rules in my house were a little bit different, and of course, having siblings who had a different variety of needs, different variety of abilities, I think I had a different formation about sort of how I evaluate human nature and what I think is important, and how I, judge people, if you will,
And
or perceive people. Yeah,
if you're, from what I understand, you're one of the oldest kids. So does that also mean that you had to help out in the household for the 6 younger kids, one way or another?
absolutely. Absolutely. I was the second. It's funny because I was the first child born to the family, but I had an older brother who was adopted, who was older than me. But I was second oldest of a family of 6. So there was a lot of responsibility just helping to make the house go, helping, getting everybody out the door in the mornings,
Yeah.
cooking. It took me a long time when I moved out on my own to figure out, how do you cook for 2 people instead of 10? 10 I could do without thinking about. 2 people, that would be, I had to sort of get my head around, and I have to get my head around that again, because now that my kids have moved out, it's just me and my husband at home. And I'm like, I don't even know what to do with all of this quiet. It's so strange. But that that was sort of the background that I brought to my work. And in fact, professionally, what I did, tech is my second career, third career, I guess. um, I worked with adults, helping them to integrate in their community before I moved into tech. And it was really interesting because I didn't see that there was continuity there, because I went from being a community integration worker to being a baby software tester on graphic software. But as I moved into the agile world, I realized that a lot of what's going on with Agile is it's about building community around the act of software development, right? It's about how do we bring people together around a problem and give them a chance to bring their talents and their skills and their enthusiasm to solving problems together. And so a lot of that background that I had around how do we create environments that allow people to thrive based on what their needs are, based on what their abilities are, still plays out when I'm, in my work as an agile coach. It's a lot better
So
paid as an agile coach, but it's a lot of the same sort of problem space around looking at what do individuals need, what are they able to do, and what needs to be set up around them to allow them to shine.
in that sense, it's the same career, but better paid one way or another, like you say. It's interesting. But I can imagine that it's also, like you said, yeah, as an oldest child, you're not responsible, but still you're asked to help out. And especially if you talk about the children who have special needs, that
Yeah.
definitely means about creating attention for what people need to make sure also to get out of the door, which is a kind of a task or a goal that you have. In software, for me, it's sometimes similar, that people have special needs, and it's completely different for someone who has Down syndrome and a developer or a tester. It's different, but at the same time, it's like it's paying attention, it's listening, it's looking at, okay, what do these people need, and how can we get together to that goal. I see similarities. Do you see that as well, or am I now inventing things that
No,
were not there?
it's as you were talking, I was thinking about the way that I would encapsulate it. Is one of the things that I learned was about really not making snap judgments about people based on what you see at first, right? Because just because people carry themselves a certain way or have, I'm going to say have a certain label attached to them. That doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with what they can do and how they do it. And that's one of the things that I really carried forward from sort of unusual beginnings, was not making assumptions about, oh, this person sort of looks this way and sounds this way, they must be like this. Because I had some very early lessons from my siblings who, were in different ways incredibly capable people. Despite the fact that if you just met them, you'd think, oh, this poor little girl, she needs so much support. And it's like, no, she's pretty capable. She's pretty good at manipulating her environment to do all of the things she wants her environment to do. Don't underestimate that.
And at the same time, if I remember correctly, you said you had 3 siblings who had Down syndrome. So these 3 were, I assume, all 3 different. So from the outside, people that just meet them and they just have a look at them, they might think, oh, they're all 3 the same. But you, as a child, you probably know the differences between these 3 siblings, and you know that, okay, this one can do this one can do that, and this one needs more attention there. So you immediately feel that difference right away, I would say, as a young child already.
Yeah, absolutely. They had very different needs, but also very different capabilities. Different capabilities and very different strengths.
And I can imagine that really helps to see just beyond that label, because of course, if it's one person, you might be tempting to think, oh, that label means this, where actually you now see, oh, this label means actually nothing, because all 3 are completely different. It has some meaning and it has some context, but still the rest of the person is so much richer than just a label.
Absolutely. Like labels can be useful. They can be helpful. We, as humans, we like to categorize things, right? But they're never all encompassing. They're just one way of thinking about a person, one way of thinking about a situation, and recognizing that there are so many other points of view. And even within that label, that category, you're going to have a whole lot of diversity. That's something you have to be aware of when you are working with people.
I really like that. And I'm working with some people who had very late in their life, we had the labels of autism, of ADHD, and in one way it's helping these people, because now they realize, oh, this is why sometimes it feels different. But they also realize that if I would receive this label when I was very young, it could have backfired in school, because teachers had no idea on how to deal with it. Now they found me a difficult kid, but that's another kind of label that sometimes is less hurting than other kind of labels, especially with people that totally don't understand what these labels mean. I think, like you say, labels can be both good and bad. I think we need to be very careful. Labels for me are interesting when we work with people who really understand the context of the labels, and to just say, okay, that gives some kind of context. If you have that knowledge to understand the label, and other than that, we need to be very careful. I think it's the same thing with developers and testers, and okay, that just having one kind of label might about a tool or something else, we might not fully understand everything if you don't know. So thanks for sharing that, because that's indeed something, well, the multiple facets of it, the larger family, the fact that a lot of them have been adopted, the fact that they have some special care that they need one way or another, and special gifts that they bring. That's definitely something that is that will influence you. So thank you for sharing that. And you already talked a little bit about that differences, but what if you have not been doing what you've been doing now? Was there something else destined? So you talked already about that first career. Was there something else you were destined to be when you were young?
Well, it's funny because the first thing I wanted to be was an astronaut, because I wanted to be the first female astronaut, and then I discovered I'd missed the boat on that. But
and so you dropped it. So that said, okay, if I'm not the first,
I
don't care.
No, not interested at that point. Exactly. But after that, I spent a long period, like most of my childhood, my high school years, most of the way through university, I was going to go to medical school. In fact, I was going to go and be a developmental pediatrician. That was what I wanted to do. And then about halfway through medical school, or not medical school, halfway through university, just before, in fact, I had my interview for medical school admission, I was like, I don't think I really want to go to medical school. I don't want to practice medicine. And so I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. And that's where I ended up working. I went into working in services that supported, I worked in a group home with children who had been through the foster care system and needed more support than a foster family could provide. I worked in recreation programs for adults with different sorts of disabilities. My last job before I switched into tech was working, as I said, working as a community integration worker, working with adults in the community to help them navigate the community to better meet their needs so that they could thrive in the community. And if I hadn't made the switch into tech, honestly, I would probably still be working in that field. What happened at one point was politics, because there was a government that was elected that didn't think that they should be investing money in those sorts of social services. And suddenly it was like, if I want to put food on the table, I need to find another line of work. And that's how I got connected with the software testing job. And since then, it's been tech mostly all the way.
It's interesting that these governments, they make certain decisions, and that forces us into another life. And from what it looks like now, you're happy with that choice. At least you really have an impact on a lot of things. That's what I see. But it's sometimes indeed, like you say, outside events that make us rethink some of our values and some of our decisions that we take, and then we move on, or at least you moved on. Was that an easy switch for you to go? Was that something that was like, oh, this decision is from the government and quickly I go, or how did that happen?
So what happened is I'd had a bit of a background in desktop publishing, because while I was still in school, I spent a year working for my parents who had a printing business for a while. And so I had done some desktop publishing and graphic design for them. I had worked on another project where I was designing a survey. It was in social services, but so I had some computer skills that were transferable, even though I had always thought, oh, I don't want to go into tech. That's what my parents did. And it turned out I knew somebody who knew somebody, and they were looking for testers, and my skill set was a good fit for the kind of software testing that they needed done. And so that's where I ended up making the transition. And it was surprising. Would I have predicted the course of my career at any point along the way? Oh no. I've never had a plan that, I will do this, and then I will do this, and then I will do this. It's just sort of, let's see what opportunities exist now, and I'll pick from what's available and see how that works out for a while. And that has been like the deep, dark secret of my entire career, is not really having much of a master plan.
But I like the way you put it, because I think a lot. I have a son who's at university now, and another one who's about to start next year, and that really is interesting when they think about these kind of choices. For them, it's like, this is the most important choice, and the rest of my life will depend. And it's one way, it's like, there's things that depend, but it's not like once you took a choice and once you took a path that there is nothing else you can do. A lot of people, the paths will diverge at some point, and it's not predictable. And so I wonder, you were saying that you didn't want to do the thing that your parents did. Did they see this coming? Did they kind of say, when you said, oh, I'm going to become a tester, did they say, oh, finally I saw that coming, or no?
Not at all. Not at all. Like I'm going to say, I was always a very mathy kind of kid. I was very adept at math and those sorts of things. And my mother had been a programmer. And I think that, she was aware that I could do that kind of work if I wanted to, but they never had they never pushed me in a particular direction. They never had any expectation around this. It turned out this way. It's funny, because I had a conversation with my mother fairly late in her life, where I was talking about the possibility of going to the Grace Hopper Conference, which is the giant conference for women in tech, right? The big established, fabulous event. And my mom just offhandedly mentioned, oh yeah, I had dinner with Grace Hopper once in the early 60s. We got together and talked about COBOL. I was like, And you never mentioned this anywhere along the way until now? What?
Yeah, it's yeah, I can so see this for me, because for her this was just one of the people that she worked with, and that doesn't really matter. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, so many years later, that this woman is such an inspiration for other people, that and of course, if you're out of that scene, you don't realize some of that.
Yeah.
And then it's also sometimes is that some of these role models, well, most role models don't see themselves as role models. It's the other people that see them. I just had a conversation with a woman last week that said, yeah, I miss role models there and there. And I said, yeah, but do you see that you are a role model for this and that? And it's like, okay, now I can see it that you bring it, but I didn't think about myself. And that is sometimes the same with the people around the role models, that sometimes they think, okay, I just work with them and they're just colleagues, but they don't always realize what the influence they might have on a larger community.
Absolutely. And I think the people who really are role models, who honestly really are, and I'm going to use square quotes here, square quotes here deliberately, thought leaders, don't see themselves that way. I always get kind of twitchy when people build themselves as, I'm a thought leader in the Agile world. It's like, maybe,
well,
but
if you have to say it, then you're not. I mean,
exactly. And it's like, no, there's lots of people who are out there making an impression who don't position themselves that way. But people do what they need to do. I've learned a lot about marketing and things in the past couple of years, and people do what they need to do in order to put themselves out there.
Yeah, it's that is especially if you're an independent, you have to at the same time make some publicity to make sure that people know you. But I had a similar kind of conversation with Esther Derby. She said, okay, my trouble I have is when I join a company, I want to sell them like, okay, I am the right person for you. And at the same time, when I enter, it's more like, okay, but I don't want to say I have the solution. I want to work with you. And Esther really said, yeah, but you can market yourself as, I can be the one that can ask you the right questions. I don't know the right answers. And I was like, yeah, that's actually what I would like much more. I don't want to sell myself as I know everything, but I might be the one that will be able to help you to figure it out together with me. And that's a whole different thing than I'm the thought leader and I'm the one who will solve all your problems. At the same time, I also see that for me, the feeling I have that, for example, we had a few people that were forerunners for extreme programming, like Ken Beck. At the moment that they positioned themselves less as consultant, as, hey, this is XP and this is how I see it. When they went much more working in teams, it feels that extreme programming became less the poster child for Agile. And at the same time, we had the opposite in Scrum, where people saying, oh, this is Scrum. And then we had the whole, the way the training was set up and everything. So I also miss that. I don't want to be that person, but I understand why people don't want to be that role. But at the same time, for some of the techniques, it's good to have someone who's upfront and who says this is the only way and this is the best way to do it, because it shows some of these things to people. How do you feel about that?
It shows some of these things to people, and it's the way that people can connect with the ideas a lot of the time. Like, one of the challenges for the kind of work that we do, what you were saying about your conversation with Esther really resonated, because I don't like positioning myself as I am the person with the solutions. I'm the person who can help you figure out the solutions, but that's a much harder thing to sell. That's because people are naturally attracted towards the certainty of, you can just tell me what to do and it will all get better, right? We're wired to respond to that. And so you kind of need a bit of both. There needs to be some of that certainty. Here, I know some things that you can do. I know some things that you can try. These are great ideas. Let's see how they work for you. But they also need to be balanced with for me, the most important line of the Agile Manifesto is that very first line of, we are uncovering better ways by doing it and by helping other people do it, right? You have to go in prepared with, I have a thing that we can try and I believe it will help you, but we're not just going to try it blindly. We're going to try it and we're going to look at how it's working for us and adapt based on adapt based on what we've learned. That's a really hard value proposition to sell, though, right? Because that sounds like a lot of work and a lot of uncertainty. And
Yeah,
people like to sign up for certainty. They like to pay a lot of money for, you're going to bring me the solution, won't you? I'm going to teach you how to ask better questions so that we can find the solution together. That's not quite as catchy of a marketing byline, you know?
but I think it also depends really a little bit where people are in their journey. I mean, I can imagine that people who are starting, they need much more. And for me, in that sense, the Scrum idea about, okay, we're going to bring you something and you implement it the way it is, and then you keep refining it. It's really good for people who are starting, because it makes it very clear that's what we're going to do. A little bit later down the line, it might be, okay, I have two solutions for you. There is Scrum, there is Kanban, and maybe in yours time, this would be the best choice for you. And then if they're a little bit further down the line, it's like, I see two options. Which one do you prefer? Let's have that conversation. And then a little later, it's okay, what options do you see? And voila. And that's, for me, that really depends. And that's something I only learned like the last, I don't know, couple of years. In the beginning, it was much more like, I only want to ask these questions. But then I lost all these beginners, because they were like, yeah, but what do I need to do? And then telling them, yeah, but I'll ask you some questions. Like you say, you can't sell that.
There's got to be a balance of both of those stances, right? To work as an agile coach, to work as an organizational change agent, you need to bring both of those capabilities and a whole bunch of others to the table. Like, I'm actually a big fan of the agile coaching capability model that Michael and Lyssa put together in the Agile Coaching Institute, where they talk about, you're balancing out coaching and domain expertise and lean and agile expertise and facilitation skills. And I can't remember the other four right at the moment, so I won't try to list them. But recognizing that you need to have capabilities in all of these areas, and you need to have the judgment to figure out, when do I need to be standing in which skill? When do I, when I work with a new group, how do I assess where really actually what they need is a fair bit of mentoring and expertise, and the why don't you try this, as opposed to the sitting down and going, well, what are you observing? What do you think might work? What options do we have here? Because those are equally valid skills in different contexts, and you really need to be aware of that.
Yeah,
but
the problem usually is when we sell ourselves to, I don't know, HR or some other group, where the actual people where we're working with, that's where you see that balance. But of course, the people deciding on who to hire might not always realize, what are the challenges that they need. So thank you for bringing that up, because it's indeed much more complex. And talking about challenges, when you look at your own challenge, what do you consider today your biggest challenge that you have right now, or at least the biggest challenge that you want to share?
So I thought about this, and I'm going to say there's two challenges that I have consistently. One is focus, and the other is sustainable pace. Because I am naturally a really curious person. And when I encounter a new idea, when I see something that's going, like, I want to understand how things work. I want to understand the context. I want to look into the history of stuff. I was, oh, that's an interesting idea. I got to go off and learn something about this. And so rather than, I would characterize myself as a generalist. Like, I'm a generalist of generalists. I know a little bit about programming. I know a lot about software testing. I know about organizational coaching. I know about Lego Serious. I know about, like, I've sort of dipped in a lot of places, which means I have this huge pool of knowledge and experience to draw from. But sometimes I think, wow, my life would be a lot simpler if I just sort of picked one or two things and dug in that direction. But
when you learn a thing, because it's interesting the way you explained it in the beginning. You said, I'm interested in a thing, and then you still dug in for it, but you lose it after you know enough, or how should I see this?
I see it more as putting more things in my toolkit. Right? And they all fit together. So if you think about it from the point of view of being an agile coach, right? I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went off and did some, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of agile coaching. I went o organizational coaching training, because in the early days, the only coaching that was available, the primary coaching model was one-to-one coaching. How do we coach individuals? And I'm like, but I'm interested in working with systems. So I went off and learned about systems coaching. And that's a tool I have in my toolbox. But I know people who what they do is organizational systems coaching. And I sort of thought, oh, maybe that's the direction I should go off into. But then it's like, no, but I really like the idea of play and bringing play into the workplace. And so, I'm going to focus on Lego Serious Play. I'm going to focus on visual facilitation. I've done a lot of work increasing my visualization skills, because I realized as a communication tool, getting away from the PowerPoint and let's actually just sketch things out and draw pictures that people connect a little bit more with as humans. And then there's the magic thing that happens where it's not just I have a marker in my hand, everybody has a marker in their hand and we're drawing together, but just in that sentence, I guess that was a paragraph, maybe it was a really long run-on sentence, I'm talking about, I went off and did some more organizational coaching, and then I was off doing Lego Serious Play, and now I'm doing visual facilitation, and I've got all of those things going on, and that's where I'm saying that focus is not one of my strengths. So I get interested in lots of things, and I can see the usefulness of lots of things.
Yeah, but at the same, I've read a couple of books in that direction that really show that many people, we tend to look at people as specialists, but if you look back at the history of a lot of the specialists, they actually have a path a lot similar to what you are. It's like, okay, they have really dived into multiple things, and sometimes they end up stuck with one thing. And in a way, you could say your specialization is agile coaching, but for that you need a lot of other tools, and or you could say that your specialization is the connection between humans, whatever that means, to make it work, and then it's even outside IT and all of that stuff. But I think the world is not so black and white as between generalists and specialists we sometimes think, because we think that the world is all about specialists, and in reality, I don't see it that much. I think I don't know how this feels for you, but
I don't think the world is really centered around those deep specializations. Like, I'm glad there are some people who are like, oh, I'm really interested in this one idea. I'm going to devote my life to this one idea, because that's great. That's how we, make some exciting discoveries. That's how we get depth of knowledge in some areas. But I think the world in general is just, because it's a complex system. It's a system of complex systems, right? That sort of generalist approach is probably more successful in the long run, because you need to be prepared to deal with a whole bunch of possible eventualities. I think, however, in the workplace, though, we still have a lot of models. We have a lot of systems in the workplace which are built along those lines of, we expect you to become a specialist doing this. And that's how we're set up to support you. That's how we're set up to evaluate you. That's how we're set up to structure your career path. And so there's a bit of a mental culture clash going on an ongoing basis about how do we balance out that sort of desire. And sometimes there's very appropriate context for, we really want you to focus on doing one thing well, versus we want you to focus on being able to do a number of things well enough. And it's actually having the number of things well enough that is more important in the long run for success. And there's a constant dance. I mean, you talked about the world isn't black and white. The longer I live, the more I realize that very, very little is black or white. It's all, I was going to say shades of gray, but it's not that monotone, right?
That brings us to another kind of world. But it's interesting, because when you were talking about the specialists, indeed, we have, I don't know, we used to say we have doctors who are operating, but now then we had doctors who are heart surgeons, but now we have lower part of the heart operating, or left part of the surgeon, because it's always becoming even more specialized. But when you do an operation on a heart, you don't have that just that one specialist. No, you have general doctors around it, you have nurses around it that know about, okay, how do we put people under narcose and a few other things. So even these specialists, they work in teams to make sure that you survive the whole operation. And yes, we might look at this surgeon is the one doing the exactly specific operation to solve my heart one way or another, but that doesn't mean that the others are not important. No, you need to get to that place. You need to be able to get under narcose and get out of narcose and whatever. I don't know anything about surgery for those who are listening, but yeah, but that's the kind of thing that we need. All these kind of things. I think it's really nice that you put that balance again. And yeah, even there, I really like Ken Beck's paint drip methodology, that he says it's no longer T-shape, it's more paint drip. It's like you have lots of small little things, and some things drip deeper than others, but you also have a large top line, I would say, where we can actually say, okay, there is a lot there. So that's but you wanted to talk about a second challenge. So you said the focus is one part, and the other part is what was
sustainable pace.
So we already saw that we had a trouble with focusing because we just focused on one part. But how's the sustainable pace? What's that part of it for you?
So it's funny because there's so much, the principles of the manifesto are about creating sustainable pace so that people aren't burning out, right? We want to be able to work at a nice, consistent workload because that's how we can do our best work. That's how we can be predictable. That's how we can, be rested and well adjusted and stuff. And also, maximizing the amount of work not done, simplicity. Those are two of my favorite Agile principles. They're the two that I probably find the hardest to live by because I get interested in a lot of things. I like to do, and I want to go and work with my clients because the work is interesting. And by the way, I got to pay the bills. But I want to go and be parts of the Agile community, and I want to contribute to this event and that event and this event. And I have all these things that I want to read. And by the way, I have a life outside of work, and I have a family to attend to, and I have my own interests to pursue. And there are just not enough hours in the day. And it's funny because
do at night, and then
yeah. But I also like to sleep. Sleep is good. And it's funny because the change that the pandemic brought in my life really brought a lot of those things into focus. Like where I realized I was so I was traveling for work, and I was traveling all the time to go to different Agile community events. I would go to 16, I think one year I went to 16 or 20 conferences on top of working. And I was traveling all the time. And of course, for 3 years, I didn't travel anywhere. And it really casts that in. Now, there's other ways that you can make your pace of life unsustainable, even without leaving your house.
Here we are talking on a Sunday afternoon, and okay.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have to commute. I might as well just go sit in front of my computer starting at, whatever time I would usually be getting in the car or getting on the train. Yeah. But just sort of being able to find the balance in my life of time for work, time for I'm going to say the activities around work that are building my work community, but also making enough time for myself. That has been a constant challenge. So still working that out.
I recognize that. I remember that I have like many of us, as if you're independent, I have some kind of spreadsheet that tracks the days that I'm working for a client.
Yeah.
And at some year, I realized at some point, like, okay, my partner was saying, but we should maybe take a little more holidays. I was like, but if I count the number of days that I'm working, that's kind of normal. It feels like even less than other people. Until I started adding all the days I went to a conference. And then I realized, okay, instead of just 210 days, it's actually 240 days. Okay, that becomes much closer to actually being too much. And I didn't track it at that time. So that's the first year I started tracking. And then I realized, okay, there is actually a lot of these things. And that really, if I didn't track it very quickly, it would be off balance like it had been for many years. And it's part of the reason why, for example, for this thing, I do a lot of these recording. It takes a lot of time, but I decided for this year, I'm not going to go to conferences outside Belgium. So I still go to some conferences inside Belgium, but that's rather close. That's not that far away. I don't need to take a plane. and that brings a lot more balance. I see the same issue as you say. It's very tempting to then fill all the evenings and do all other kind of stuff. But at least it feels like, okay, there is some balance. And I think just like you, and I heard, I think Lyssa Adkins said something similar. A few others people said really like, it's not like we don't want to go to clients in other countries. It's not like we don't want to do other things, but it really should bring value, and not so much money value, but okay, is it really worth that I go for take a plane, take a train, whatever, and then be at the client for 1 hour and then leave again? Why can't we just do this remotely? And maybe instead of 1 hour, I can spend 2 or 3 hours. I spend less time because I don't need to travel, and you get more time. So
Yeah.
that I think that's actually. But I think I'm not going to say that the pandemic is good, but that part about the pandemic, the fact that people started to rethink about their lives, that's definitely some good parts. And that brings me kind of to the second part of that question. So I asked about the biggest challenge, and also about why is it a good thing. So for that balance, you kind of said the pandemic that brought it. The fact itself that it's hard for you to do sustainable pace. Where is there anything good for you?
Well, I mean, it's directly tied to, I'm going to say it's tied to that being curious, that being connected, that honestly, that sort of one of my happy places was when I feel I'm involved in building community.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where that's the upside of that lack of sustainability, is because the reason that I'm busy is I'm off doing all of these really cool, interesting things that are allowing, or I had been off doing all of these cool, interesting things. Haven't been doing a whole lot of that for the past couple of years, but being able to go out and make those connections and meet people and learn new things, and that's what allows me to take in all of those experiences. I just, you need to take rest for yourself. And this is where I'll be super blunt about this. Like last year, I did not work for 7 months because the previous 2 years had been so intense. It was like, no, I just need to step away from everything for a while. I was pretty burnt out. And that's a common pattern that I've heard from people who get you get sucked in, and you're doing all the things, and it's important and you need to do it, and then you hit a wall and you realize, no, I really need to back away and stop for a little bit, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to continue doing this.
And it's also, I think, well, especially because these years were the pandemic years, I think a lot of us during these 2 years of pandemic, and it's still not over, but the world is a little bit opening up. I think for a lot of people, it was like, okay, I see it as we were in some kind of survival mode. And so some people crashed right at the beginning of the pandemic, and others we were able to keep going and make it work, but we're still in survival mode. And now that the world is opening up, we realize a little bit, like you said, 7 months ago, then that's like, wait a minute, I've been past my I've been in the red for a very long time. It's too much, and let's stop. And I think I see this, I hear this is, I think, the fourth of the fifth time that I talk about this on this show. I see it with a lot of other people around me as well. It's like, we've been to survival mode. We were lucky as a family. We just built a new house, so we had we had all the space, and still at the same time, as a couple, it felt like, whoa, we've never been alone without the children. I mean, the children were always there for 2-3 years. That's not something we're used as a couple. We need some time for ourselves. We need to make sure that we both as a person, but as a couple, we need to take rest and to think about that unity. I think that is something that I recognize. And if I'm I don't know how much you want to go into detail that, but if I'm understanding correctly, that was also the moment that you took over the role for the Agile Alliance. Is that correctly, that you jumped into it to help out?
Yeah, so I was on the board of directors of the Agile Alliance for 6 years. I just ended my term in December, my second term in December. And what happened in March 2020 was, in February 2020, I was elected chair of the board of Agile Alliance, the board meeting in Vancouver. I had to leave the board meeting midway through it because of a family emergency. In fact, my mother passed away that weekend.
Wow.
And so there was, I'll say 2 big changes that happened. One clearly more significant than the other. But then a month after that, the week that kind of the pandemic was announced and everybody was sent home from work, we realized that there were going to be some changes in Agile Alliance. And I was chair of the board, so I was responsible for how are we going to address some of these changes. We had to cancel conferences, which was a big thing, both from the disruption, but also Agile Alliance's main revenue stream is
So
in
money
person
wise
events.
that's
Yeah.
so you're now responsible for a large organization and your biggest source of income just
disappeared, right? And then there was along with that, there was a change of leadership within the organization, which is how I ended up stepping into the role of managing director. And that was an interesting time. Again, things that I would never have predicted for my career, but just that's sort of the way the circumstances fell out. And it was a really, really interesting 2 years, but it was also a very, very intense 2 years, because between the strain of the pandemic and the effect on the operations of the organization, because it was sort of a very mixed blessing, because I got involved with Agile Alliance in the first place because I was like, Agile 20XX is great. Wonderful conference. Everybody gets together. Love that it happens. But what do we do the other 360 days a year? What do we do for all of the people who, for whatever reason, are never going to attend that conference? How do we support the rest of the Agile community? And I ended up in the managing director role at a time where it's like, well, we know we can't have the conference, so what are we going to do? But there was the catch-22 of, without the conference, we don't have revenues coming in. So what are we going to do about that? And I'll just say it was a wild ride. And it also...
And that was on top of the pandemic that you had to deal with in your personal life as well, and doing all of that remotely. And so it's not like you were already on the board, so you knew these people already, but you were elected at that moment. At the moment that, like you say, there was some leadership going away, you took over at the moment that you didn't have any time to prepare, because bam, the pandemic is there and you basically have to deal with it all at the same time. And what I didn't know, what you just shared, is that on the moment that there was even a big change in your personal life as well, where you lost the support of your mother, because that has, I haven't lost any parents, so I don't know, but I can imagine that it has a huge impact on you as a person as well. So that's
It was a lot of changes all at once. It was a lot of changes all at once, and a lot of uncertainty as a result. And I'm the kind of person who I just like, well, you just keep going, one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. And but it was a pretty intense experience. And I don't know where I know you wanted to ask about remote working at some point down, so maybe getting ahead of the conversation.
We can go ahead about remote work. Let's add this question. So, what did you learn about remote work in that period?
So you talked about the opportunities that it opens up, right? Where it allows us to make connections all around the world without the overhead of travel, without the overhead of those transitions and the time and the cost and the, but it also, which was fabulous. And that's one of the things that the pandemic has opened up. It sort of broke down some of the geographic barriers to getting together, because if we're all connecting this way, it doesn't matter where you and I are sitting in the world. We can connect, we can work together over great distances, over different time zones, and it makes it all possible. But that also carries a lot with it, in that we're trying to make it work over vastly different time zones, but we could be 12 hours apart, and you're still in your situation where it's 8:00 in the morning, and I'm in my situation where it's 8:00 in the evening, and sort of the life outside of this screen, we're in very different places. But we're here both at work trying to do this thing, ignoring the fact that we're at different points in our day. And I think that's a challenge that we don't think about a lot, because it's just, oh, well, it's easy for us to connect, let's just do it whatever time. But this was a challenge we had with the Agile Alliance, because we switched from our having our board meetings in person to having virtual board meetings. Well, we had board members in Australia, in India, in South Africa, in Europe, in at least 2 different time zones in North America, in South America. And when you put all of those things on the calendar, there's actually really no good time where everybody is awake at the same time and ready to go. You
It's
know, and
always
that
night somewhere,
it's
basically.
always
That's what
night
you're
somewhere. It's always the middle of the night somewhere, right? So you figure out,
saying.
how do we make those trade-offs? But it means you've got people who are getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and people who are staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning. And that takes its toll. That takes its toll when you're working remotely that way. The other challenge with remote work, and I noticed this, I worked on a project like 2008. It was a worldwide project doing network migration sites and 600 sites all around the world and stuff. There's always somebody in the office. There's always somebody in the office. There's always stuff going on. And when your workplace is also your home, for a lot of us, it's a
Oh, yeah.
lot harder to draw those boundaries and go, I'm going to the office now. I'm going to go do my work. Maybe I'm going to flex time because it's great. I have the flexibility that if I need a couple of hours in the middle of the day to do something, I can go do that, and I'll work when it's convenient for me. But it's really easy for that to bleed into, I'm never really out of the office because I live in the office and I carry the office with me in my pocket. I was going to hold up my phone, but I don't know where it is, but so those boundaries get very blurry. And especially when you're working with people all over the planet as well, it's suddenly, oh, well, no, it makes sense. I'll meet you at 7 p.m. I'll meet you on the Sunday. I'll do whatever because that's where the overlap in our schedule is. But suddenly, if you're not careful about it, it's like, and suddenly in Canada, we have a fairly standard 37 and a half to 40-hour work week. My 40-hour work week becomes a 50-hour work week, becomes a 60-hour work week because it just, and
Yeah,
during the
I,
pandemic, when people had less options for what they could do outside of work, I think that just exacerbated that.
yeah, I used to say during the pandemic that we didn't work at home, we were living at work much more. It felt like that for a lot of people because of the bleeding in all kind of directions, on time, on space, on depending. Like I said, we were lucky to have a new home that every
Yeah.
child had their own room and everything, but that's not the case for everyone. And then it becomes even harder when you have multiple people and your kids are out of the house, mine are well, not yet, but they're already large, big enough that they can take care of themselves. But if you have small children, that's completely impossible, and then it's all these kind of challenges. So that's but thanks for sharing and giving an insight on how that was, because a lot of people, well, we know the Agile Alliance, and some of us, well, everybody who knows it realize, okay, the big conference is going away, but not everybody realizes what that impact had, both on the institution itself. What does that mean? All the income goes away, but also on how to reorganize. I was interested in helping out with the Agile Alliance at some point, so I had some conversations when I knew about things going remote. But not many people realize how different that is when you have people indeed all around the world with time zones that never overlap. And that is a big challenge. So thanks for sharing that, because it's I think it's important, and I think for many people, I see this also with people working from different countries, that thanks to the pandemic they now realize what it is for people in other countries that have been working remote. Oh, that's what you mean when you schedule something very late. Oh, they didn't realize that people were actually doing this. And yeah, that we don't always want that, but somehow it bleeds in. Or like you say, if you have people from all around the world, someone has to give in for, and hopefully it's always someone else. And I know that the Agile Alliance made sure that you looked at what is possible for who, and I know that there is some work there, but like you say, someone always has to get up in the night to make it work.
Well, it really sort of brought to life the challenge of how do we do that? How do we make things accessible for the Agile community all around the world? Like, some great experiments came out of it. So we had a big online conference, which was a fascinating learning experience, the Agile 2021 event, where, you know, we tried to do things specifically for all around the world. And that was, I'll say we learned a lot from that. It was a successful conference, but one of the things that I personally took away is actually designing online experiences. Really, the way people interact with online experiences is very different from the way they interact with an in-person experience. It's a fundamentally different thing. You can't just take, oh, we do this conference here, let's put it online. Let's all sit in front of our screen for X number of hours a day. You know, there's ways people change their behavior around taking in things remotely versus being there physically, that you have to think about when you're designing events, when you're designing experiences. But, you know, one of the things that came out of that I'm actually really proud of is one of the activities. So Agile Alliance spun up a whole bunch of member activities online. There's a different event every week. There's a lean coffee, there's a member meetup. And one of the things that April and I are doing is we have a monthly games meetup called Game On, that is a virtual community that's coming together. We get people coming from almost all around the world. It's entirely the wrong time of the day if you're in Southeast Asia, but we get people, you know, from India all the way through the Americas who come and join us in this meetup once a month. And we're trying to figure out how to play games online. And we're trying to do it in a really low tech way. Like, we don't want to have, oh, you have to have this special Miro board and you have to have this and you have to have that. It's like, how can we use these playful activities, these games that we use for learning and for teaching and for team building? How can we play them when we're together remotely and do it in the lowest tech way possible? And so we've had a lot of fun hacking different activities in that meetup. And the community that's coming together around it is really quite lovely. We've got a really keen, cohesive group of people who are really interested in this topic. They look forward to getting together every month. They bring great conversation. And the way some of the games have evolved has gone beyond anything we could have imagined. Like, one of the early sessions, we thought, okay, so how would you play the marshmallow challenge if you can't all be in the same room together? And we were thinking about that. How do you do that? Because, of course, the marshmallow challenge relies on everybody being around the table, and we've got our spaghetti and we've got our tape and our string and our marshmallow, and we're all trying to build a tower. And so the hack that we did on it is we thought, okay, well, what if we ask people, we're going to still get you into groups, and then we're going to ask people where they are to go find 15 things that you can use to build a tower. And then each group will decide which person's stuff they want to use to build. And then the group will work together. One person will kind of be the building robot, and the group will work together to design and build the tower, and then we'll see what comes out of that experience.
And then you have to give instructions, and the instructions have to be clear enough. And that brings a really interesting challenge.
Yeah, but what was amazing is what people did with this, because some people said, okay, yeah, I'll get my 15 things. I'm going to get my marker. I'll get my Post-its. I'll use my book, and we'll build something. Other people took their office furniture. The tallest tower was over 8 feet tall.
Wow. Because of course, you're no longer limited by what you can take, of course, and that's okay. That's interesting. So that really brings in other kind of things that you can take. But I really like that you stress it, that you can have people all around the world. The example I usually give is I really love the community that was started years ago in London, the Extreme Tuesday Club, so XTC. I was only able to go there like 2 or 3 times in my life, because I don't visit London all that often, even though by train it's not that far away. I could actually do it. But of course, that's not something I would just do for an evening and then go back to Belgium. So I didn't do that very often. But in the pandemic, they also moved online, and I think I went every month of the first year, because that was possible all of a sudden, and I could reconnect with people that I didn't know everybody, but I knew quite a chunk of people that I really like to reconnect with. And that for me was like, oh, actually, I think in the first year of the pandemic, I went to a lot more conferences or a lot more evening events because of that. then we go back to the problem that you stated before about doing too much. So this is another risk there. But I avoided going to Belgium things, because the Belgium things also, we have a similar kind of thing as what you say about games. That is in Belgium very often. They also went online, but I didn't go there. Why? Because it was like, yeah, why should I go to a Belgium one when I now can go to the international ones? Because that was something new, which is of course not completely true, because of course the Belgium ones also went online, and there were Belgians and there were other people also. But for me, it was like, okay, I can reconnect in a different way to people outside my country, and that's really interesting. That's for me, I think, and I really like what you stressed about these events. They have to happen. They can happen, but they work in a completely different way, and you really need to rethink your things. And I think for me, this is where I think a lot of us, we can learn so much, because we learned to do facilitation in person, because we've been doing it for 30-40 years. I don't know when people started creating some of these facilitation techniques, but like years and years ago. But remote, there's just a limited number of people who had experience before the pandemic, and all of a sudden now we all had to think, and we all needed to learn a lot of that. So that's
we've really had to figure out how do we create those experiences so that they're rich and they're meaningful when everybody is online, because it is so much of it's such a different context than when we're all in the same room. And that's something that I'm still working at learning how best to do that, because it's just, you'd think, oh, well, we're all getting together around this thing and we can see each other and we can talk to each other. How is that different than us sitting around a table in the same room? Well, it's so different because, first of all, we're not all in the same environment. We're in this same little box, but the actual space we're in, the temperature it is here, what time of day it is outside my window, what else is going on, is so completely different. And also the information that's available to us, when all I can see is just what I choose to let you see about my environment. You can see my head, you can see my face, you can see my carefully curated background or an artificial background. That's very different information than if we're sitting in the same room and you get all of my body language. You can hear my breathing. You've got a lot more information about what's going on. And so you have to structure those experiences differently. The other thing that I've been finding, which is, it's such a mechanical thing, but I find that it just takes, even though with remote gathering, it's instantaneous. We click the button and we're all together. It actually takes a little bit longer to bring people together when they're remote than when they're all in the same room. I think it takes a little bit longer to actually establish that shared context and that shared focus, so that people all understand, oh, this is here. This is what we're here to do together. Here's how we're going to do it. You talked about when I was talking about the Marshmallow Challenge, the clarity of giving instructions and things like that. I find that everything is just a little bit more complicated when we're doing it online.
Yeah, but connection is also, when you go to a physical meeting, typically, there's people dropping in at multiple times. So before everybody's there, you have already a chat. How is it? How are the kids? How is the weather? Whatever. And you had a lot of meetings. So except for the last person that joins in, the others had some time to connect.
Yeah.
Remote, even if we all connect at different times, people are silently working on their computer, reading the last emails before the facility then says, okay, we're now all here, let's start. Well, we should use that time the similar way as we do physically, but for whatever reason, we don't do it enough. And when I, as a facilitator, try to do that, people look at me like, what are you doing? This is my 5-minute break, whatever.
Yeah.
Because we all have, that's the other part, that with meetings and companies, the natural boundary fell away. The boundary for having lots of meetings in a company is the number of meeting rooms. Remote, we have unlimited number of meeting rooms. So we schedule back-to-back meeting one after the other. And so that is why people use that 5-minute time that not everybody's there, to just breathe and relax instead of connecting. And,
absolutely.
So there is a lot that we still need to learn and learn to do these things. And I think it also depends a little bit on generations. I see, for example, my daughter of 15 connecting completely different remote, because that's how this is her life. She's been living with screens for most part of her life, and so for her, connecting with friends is just, okay, I'll send a 5-second chat in the morning on video with my friends to say, hello, good morning, blah, blah, I say something, and then go. And it's like most people my age are like, oh, I try to avoid video as much as possible, and I don't want to have pictures of me. And her age is like, we're sending just 5 seconds videos that are throwaway videos. It's like a completely different world. That's and then we need to connect all of these people together. So thank you for bringing that remote part already up. And it kind of shows a lot of these things. And for me, logical to that next question, you are, this video shows it already, this conversation. You are, for me, a very passionate, a very driven person. I just don't know, not just from today, I've known it from you. Do you know where that drive or that passion is coming from?
I don't really know. It's funny because a lot of, one of the themes in this conversation, a lot of what I do is I really believe in bringing community together. I really believe that people are stronger, better, happier when they are part of a community, when they're working together, when they have a sense of place. I don't think humans are essentially solitary creatures. Having said that, I wouldn't describe myself as a people person. I love the idea of people. The reality of people, I'm not always so thrilled about. But in the work that I do, that's sort of one of the driving commonalities. Is it's always for me about how do I bring people together to do really cool things. As I said, the other half of that, though, is I'm naturally very introverted. So I really need to balance that out with, and I need the time by myself. Like, to be honest, during the pandemic, being at home alone not alone, I was here with my husband, but being home, not going out, not connecting with a big, broad group of people on a regular basis, I was like, that's actually very relaxing. I don't mind being at home in my little island with my husband. I'm okay with that. But having said that, as I said, in terms of what drives me, it's that how do we bring people together? How do we connect people? How do we combine our enthusiasms and our passions and our ideas and our strengths and our weaknesses to do really cool stuff together? Because that's what I think is the most exciting thing.
You brought something interesting about, okay, being introvert and liking the pandemic. What I've noticed with some other people who were introverts, that they were really surprised during the pandemic that they missed talking to people. Was that something that you felt as well? Because I know normally you go to conferences and you're there, and I know that you probably need the energy afterwards to go back to your room and to recharge. But did that surprise you, or did that happen to you, that you missed talking to people?
Well, I didn't miss talking to people because I spent most of the pandemic talking to people all day, but like this. What I didn't miss so much was the being with other people, because I had friends who were like, describe themselves as extreme extroverts, who were like, I'm losing my mind. I can't go out and hug other people. What am I going to do? I'm doing okay at home. I'm enjoying it. I like you just fine if we happen to be together, big hug. But I wasn't craving it the same way other people were. I was just like, I'm actually pretty happy. I can talk to people all day, and then at the end of the day, I turn off my computer and I go downstairs and it's just me and my husband at home, and I like that.
Yeah, but I'm asking because there's all kinds of different reactions to the pandemic and what it gave, and that's why I think it's important to share that, because there's a few people who sat here a little bit like you described, the extroverts that said I really missed the hugging and all the parts. There are other introverts that said, oh, I surprised that I actually missed also that part. And then there is people like you that actually say, no, wait a minute, I like to connect in that screen, but then, okay, I like that silence at the end and being just with my partner and that kind of thing. So that's so what I'm hearing also, that drive is helping these people. And for me, the question behind the question is a little bit also, do you know where that's coming from? Has that to do with, for example, what you described earlier on about being in a family where you needed to help out, or is it coming from something else, or don't you know?
Honestly, my first answer is I don't really know, but I have a feeling if I were to pick into it, it would probably go back to the kind of family that I was raised in, where it was about how do we support each other? How do we bring people together to do the things they want to do the things they need to do? How do we help them be the best they can be? And recognizing that you need other people to do that. Because, like when I was in high school, I was a bit of a theater nerd as well. And I wrote a collective play. Those were the drama experiences that I was most interested in, was collective activities where we all came together and we co-wrote things. I did a couple of plays like that. And it wasn't until fairly recently that I sort of made that connection back to that time in my life and thought, oh, I've always been kind of a collectivist. And maybe that's just generating patterns, cherry picking things from my experience, because human brains like to do that, right? We like to make patterns. But there's definitely a recurring theme I can pick out of my life where, even though, as I said, I will tell you, I'm not really that much of a people person. There's lots of things where it's been about, but it's about bringing groups of people together to do cool stuff. And that's what gives me the rush. It's like when I can be part of a group conversation and walk away and think, wow, those people are really smart and they have really good ideas. I don't know what I'm doing in the room with them, but I'm glad I was there because it was really exciting. It's like, that's the fun.
But the way I see it is that, or what I'm hearing is that if you have some kind of goal, then you can bring up the energy. For example, I know that we talked at Agile India 2019, where you were representing the Agile Alliance, I think, at that moment. Yeah. And I still remember the way you present and the way you talk. I mean, you're there as a person, you connect there, and you don't, if people would not know you, they would not know that you're an introvert because you're really connecting. But I hear it as a way that, okay, my goal is there. I'm there in that role as a chairman of the board or whatever you were at that time. And so then I naturally connect and okay, that's what makes it work. And then I'm doing that role. Did I see that correct?
Absolutely. Just don't drop me at a cocktail party right after that and expect me to make small talk, because that's where I'll be standing around looking kind of worried going, what do I do now?
Yeah, but I recognize that. That's for me. Yeah, I have both parts as well, the introvert and the extrovert, and indeed the cocktail party where I don't have any. There is a reason why I used to be a DJ, because that for me was the way to say, this is how I behave at parties, and then people come to me, and then dancing, there's no problem. But that making that connection, that's a little bit similar. Give me the role and I can do things to bring people together and have fun and everything there. But indeed, casually standing awkwardly at a cocktail party, that's something else.
But I know other people who love the cocktail party. Oh, I just want to go out and chat with people. I want to network. It'll be wonderful. And I'm just like, I don't even know how to begin doing that. But what I like to do instead, there was something we did at Agile India. I want to say maybe it was 2016, could have been 2014, could have been 2016, where Rich Kasparowski and I had an art project going. So in the evenings after dinner, what we had all kind of art materials available, and we invited people to come and contribute to murals. And they could do it in any other way. Anyway, they could pick up a paintbrush. We had one thing where it was literally finger painting, where people who were like, oh, I can't be creative, I'm not an artist. I'm like, do you have a finger? If you have a finger, you can come paint with us. And we made this fabulous mural over the week that was comprised of all of these different pieces that we put together in the evening. And that was so much fun. And people had so much fun doing it. And it addressed that concern that we were just talking about, where if it's just free form social connection, I'm like, I don't know quite what to do here. Well, we had something we could organize around. It was like, let's do this creative thing together. And I love doing those kinds of things.
It reminds me of the very, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 coach retreats where we did exactly this. So there was the whole event around coaching, but one of the sessions was with art in the room, and so people were having a coaching conversation while they were drawing. It was too messy, and so we, especially because we were renting rooms or we were using rooms in the offices and people didn't always like it, so we dropped it. But that was indeed some of the things, and it gave for me some really interesting conversations that was inspired by some of the work that Jim McCarthy and Michele McCarthy did of the core protocols. Really about that is that in their training room, they do the same thing. It's like people draw when we do things, and it's a little bit similar. It's different, of course, but it's similar to what you said about Lego serious play. People are busy with their hands, and all of a sudden your brain kicks into all kind of different directions, and so it's similar kind of things.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things, just to tack on to the earlier conversation about remote working, that's one of the things that we lost a little bit. And that's one of the things like that April and I are trying to address through Game On, and that I'm, trying to bring back in a bunch of different ways. Not only did we lose sort of that social glue that would happen in the hallway around the coffee machine, we also, our means of communication really narrowed down to, we talk at each other, and we type at each other, and sometimes we send PowerPoints back and forth. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is, but how do we introduce other kinds of communication? Like drawing together is really powerful. And the tools for the electronic tools for doing collaborative drawing are getting better. But while we're waiting for them to catch up and make it really easy, we can still use the power of drawing together. If we all have a marker, if we all have stickies, we can each draw and we can share our pictures, and we can even figure out how to put our pictures together. And that's a means of expression that's available to us that allows us to get at things that talking or maybe typing don't always pull out. And I think that as we're figuring out how do we continue to work together in these remote and in these hybrid situations, one of the things that we really need to think about is how do we use all of those means of communication that are at our disposal? How do we bring them effectively so that we can have richer, more colorful conversations, that we can get to shared understanding more quickly? Because words alone are really tricky. They're really important, and we can also be using exactly the same words to be talking about two different things.
Yeah, and like you say, drawing so much help. I remember back even in 2005 working with a team from Russia, Yekaterinburg, and I was having dinner with one of my colleagues, and we draw something on a napkin, and that really was a powerful thing. And I saw it moving around in the team locally in Belgium, and then all of a sudden we said, okay, but now we need to just scan it, because phones, well, you didn't have anything like phones that you could send things through. So we literally scanned it and sent it over to Russia by email, and then they adapted it in Paint. And okay, the tools were even worse than what we have now, but it very quickly became clear, like, oh, you can actually adapt these kind of paintings and you can create something together. And now with Google Paint and whatever, this would be much more better. But it so enriches that conversation, because when you talk a little bit like Jeff Patton says, we think we have the same thing in our head, but actually we're thinking about completely different things. And it's only when you start drawing and I don't remember who it was. It was someone from the DDD community that says, oh, maybe we should ask people to just draw what they have in their heads, and then we show it to each other. And then we see, oh, damn it, we have actually something different in our head. And let's talk about these differences. And that's really the powerful thing, indeed, talking about these things and showing the differences, because so often we think the same thing, and then it's just with the people who are in the same culture. And if you're in a different culture, it's even 10 times worse. Then we don't even understand that we don't understand each other. So that's so thanks for bringing that in, because it's indeed something. For me, I think we can solve it, but we're not there yet, and we need to catch up. For 30 years of non-experience working remotely and not having the tools and everything, so there's definitely a lot of work that we still need to do. And of course, we will never. It should never be the goal to replace face-to-face. We should do something extra on top of it and see what are the good things, because the big Agile conference, now that we can get back, we will definitely have it. And but maybe there should be some parts online. Maybe there should be some videos or whatever that we should look at things.
Yes. Or another kind of event just designed for online, right? I think going forward, we're going to see both. It really is going to be a hybrid world, in that, because working remotely and getting together remotely affords certain possibilities, makes things, makes it easier to do certain kinds of things, makes certain kinds of opportunities available. But I think there's going to be increasing recognition that for other kinds of things, there's still going to be value in getting together face to face. And it's finding where those balances is. And that's never going to be a one size fits all thing either. For this company, for this community, for this event, it might get structured this way. For this company, for this community, this event, it's going to be a completely different balance.
And so for you and me, it might be different. You might prefer this a little bit today, and another. So that's indeed, we need to find multiple ways of working. So let's move to and we already talked a little bit about some of the achievements that you did, but what do you consider for yourself your biggest? Well, let's go to the question behind the question. Is it, for me, this question is really about this is your opportunity to brag. Is that easy for you, Ellen, to brag? Is that easy to say, I'm proud of this?
It is really hard for me. Maybe it's sort of because I'm Canadian, and naturally we're all very, no, this isn't about us. But I find it very hard to brag. I don't even like to be necessarily at the center of attention. My natural coaching style is not to be the person at the front of the room. It's to be the person at the back of the room observing and sort of like sending notes and passing comments and going, hey, did you notice that? So bragging is difficult. When people ask me sort of what my greatest coaching moment has been, the story that I go to, because this reflects that a little bit, was with a client that I had a few years ago, big, important federal institution, big, important place. And I was working on a project there where I was coaching a number of the delivery teams, and we were in a big decision-making meeting, the kind of place people wear a lot of suits. And in the course of a conversation about whether we should do something or not do something, one of the people who was in the group of clients, I'll say, somebody I had interacted with but hadn't spent a lot of time with directly, wasn't working with directly, stuck their hand up in a meeting and said, I'm going to ask the Ellen question here. What is the value of doing this thing that we're talking about? And I was just like, yes, somebody is paying attention. Somebody is actually, I've managed to make enough of an impact that people are conscious of, are we asking the right questions at the right time? And that's, for me, when I'm going into an organization and trying to help them get better, to become more self-aware, to ask better questions, that to me represented, yes, I am having an impact.
And I want to zoom in a little bit on that one part of it, the fact that this person was saying the Ellen question, using your word, your name.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel? Did it also make you, that impact is good, but leave my name out? Is there something like that? Or is that like, no, this is good?
No, in that case, I was pretty happy that they used my name, because it was tangible evidence that I was making an impact. Like I do a lot of coaching and I work in government a lot. I work in big industry a lot. I work in big enterprise, where making change is often very difficult. I mean, it can be really difficult in very small teams as well, but we'll set that aside. But so for a lot of my career, I've often gone away going, okay, well, what difference was I really able to make? Because the team, the organization that I'm working with is kind of constrained by the system they're in. So I was pretty proud.
If they use that question, I'm pretty sure that you would recognize it as your question. But the fact that they use your name is an extra thing for you as well at that moment. Okay, not just I didn't just have impact; they also realized that this is my impact. That is important there for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And to be honest, again, that I don't get a lot of moments like that in my career, because one of the skills that I've had to learn as a coach is when you're working with a team, you're working with people, and you're having these conversations with them. Well, what about this? What about if you tried this? What about if you tried this? What about if you tried this? And then suddenly one day in public, they go, hey, what if we tried this? Your reaction as a coach needs to be, wow, what a great idea. How can I support that? Not, finally, I've only been talking about this for months and months and months.
Yeah, but that's exactly why I was asking, because indeed, it's, as a coach, you don't want that. You want them to feel that. For me, the best boss that I worked with was actually the one that when that was back when I was a volunteer in a youth club, that when I went out of a meeting, I did all these kind of things that in retrospect, I realized that he was putting into our brains, but we all had the ideas that, hey, this is my idea and this is why I want to do all of that stuff. And later on, when he went away, someone else took his role, and that person did the exact opposite. So I went, after 5 years of working there, I had lots of ideas. I went in with a lot of ideas, and basically they came all his ideas, and I dropped out because I felt like, really, I don't care about it anymore because you kind of stole the ideas. And for me, that still has impact on how I coach, in the sense that for me, it's okay as a coach that people think that they're their ideas, because that usually brings much more energy. But that's
brings
why
more
I'm
energy and more stickiness when they think it's their, like, that's the goal. That is the goal.
Exactly. But still, it's good, like you say, that from time to time people realize, okay, that's the kind of question, because that's I'm trying to use these kind of techniques also. Just let's say the month that I know I'm going away, I'm trying to end some of my coaching conversations in that sense, and I'm saying, okay, I've been coaching you now for 6 months. What's the question you think I would now ask after you just said the story? And that's the kind of thing that when people are ready to ask your Ellen question or whatever, that you realize, okay, this is when they're ready, that I can let them go. And it's not that you can't help them anymore, but at least they're at the level that you can say you're big enough. I don't know how to say it. That sounds negative on them, but that's the kind of thing you know that you can leave them.
You've given them the tools to work differently than they might have in the past, and then absolutely, that's what success looks like.
But that sounds like a really nice achievement, and people can use that in things. So that's thanks for sharing, because it may be not the grandeur thing that sometimes people say, and actually for me it feels like even more, because that's exactly the kind of impact that I hope as a coach I can have when I do things, and then people actually use, like you say, they really think about things that matters, because sometimes when we start out, they might forget about why are we doing this and does it make any sense.
Well, and I also think it's important, especially for maybe coaches who are earlier in their journey, to recognize that those things are indicators of success, because there's a lot of talk about agile transformations at the moment. We're going to take these big monolithic companies and we're going to completely transform. That's not very realistic. Hopefully we're going to make changes, but usually it takes a lot more than a group of, especially more than a group of consultants coming in and going, hey, we're going to help you be different. There are a lot of other factors at play. And earlier in my career, I thought, I'm going to go in and change the world. I'm going to go into an organization like the post office, and I'm going to be able to change everything about the way they work if I just agile at them emphatically enough. And that doesn't work. No. There's a whole pile of reasons that doesn't work, right? But I've talked to enough people who've sort of gone through that journey of, ooh, I thought that was the way to bring about change. I was going to be the person pushing all the ideas, and I was going to be leading the charge, and I was going to be encouraging everybody. And it takes a personal toll. If you are sort of grounding your sense of accomplishment in that, wow, I've managed to make the needle move like that, you can burn out pretty quickly. And so you have to kind of step back and realize, hey, I want all these things for this organization. I want all these things for these people. And I'm going to share my expertise and my experience with them. But ultimately what they do is kind of going to be beyond my control. And if I invest my sense of accomplishment in trying to make other people do things, I'm not going to be very successful, because ultimately I can't make anybody do anything else. So I have to figure out what are the things that I look for recognizing that I've made an impact, and take satisfaction from those, because maybe that needle isn't going to move very far at all, no matter what I bring to the table, because it's
And
not just about my influence.
yeah, and it takes years. You talked about post office. I worked at the Belgian Post for a while, and now I've left them, I don't know, more than 10 years. And now there are some of the things that I've been coaching that they're actually doing now. And it's because they had a ton of other coaches, and some of them said the same thing, something the opposite. And gradually, 10 years later, things have moved, because this is the kind of companies that slowly move. And that's also good in a sense. If they're too big and they would change too quickly, that's also not good at some levels. Of course, I want them to move faster and all these kind of things, but still, there is part of that. I mean, I want to give the opposite example. It's actually very easy to change people if you want to change them in a bad way. If I would start shouting and doing and all kind of things, people will shut down and not collaborate. And so that kind of change is pretty easy if you misbehave and create a toxic environment. But creating a healthy environment, that's the hard part. So if you would be able to change it too easily, it's probably somewhere bad, because you're moving it in the wrong kind of thing. At least that's sometimes how it feels. I don't know how you feel about that.
I definitely agree. It's really easy to demotivate people. Like that's a lot easier to do and a lot harder to undo than it is to help get people get motivated and excited and oriented towards change, because change is hard work. And I like the point that you raised too about some of the places that I've been coaching in. I live in a capital city, so I coach a lot with the federal government and with big institutions. I've coached at the post office. I've coached at the House of Commons. I've coached at the Bank of Canada. And those are places where, yeah, we want them to do things differently, but they're they're institutions, right? They're not they're not places that should be changing rapidly necessarily, because a lot of what they do is to try to bring stability. And you could argue that there are different ways that they could certainly be more adaptive. No question about that. But they're not places that are going through radical pivots.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
And I think being an agile practitioner in those circumstances is a different thing than, hey, I'm working with this startup that's making, a new yoga app or something, where the stakes for making changes are very, very different.
Yeah, I don't remember when. I think it's 5 to 7 years ago. I was talking to someone who was at the birth of continuous integration and continuous delivery. So really the thing like, okay, we want to install software like what they're doing in Amazon now, every second, multiple things. And this person was talking at that time like, okay, I'm at an organization, and we, instead of just going every week, or we install everything every 6 months. And I was like, whoa, that seems slow for your kind of thing that you're famous for or working for. And that person said, yeah, but before it was 2 years, so 6 months is already good. And I was like, he said, yeah, but still for you it feels like. And then the person said, yeah, but you have to realize what I'm working with, this environment maybe doesn't want that. And I was like, kind of shocked. Why would you want, what kind of environment would you not want to have faster updates? And then the person said, yeah, but I'm working on software for nuclear plants. And I was like, okay, I get it. This is not something where I want every 5 minutes a new update. This is something where I want you to be slowly, because there's lots of people involved. And if a nuclear plant, something goes wrong with the software, then that is terrible. Then it's a big accident. So of course, every 6 months is a lot better than 2 years. And maybe that's the maximum. Maybe they did it now every month. I don't know. But it's still, this is not something you want every day. You want it to go slowly. And for me, that is also what Agile is about. It's at the right pace. It's trying to figure out what's the pace that is working for that customer and that is adapted to the kind of thing. And yes, we think about faster, because usually faster is better, but it's not always the case. It's you need to be adaptive at the right thing. So thanks for bringing that that nuance on these kind of things for the kind of companies that we're working for is different than, of course, when the Agile Manifesto was created. So there's a big thing there. So thanks for sharing that. Let's move to another question where we kind of already touched a little bit about it, but do you have any personal agility tip? Is there anything that you say, this is the way I'm working, or something that is interesting for people to learn from you?
I think the biggest lesson that I've had to learn is about letting go of certainty and being willing to hold options open. In that, thinking about, we're all, not all, I shouldn't generalize like that. We like to get to solutions. We like to think, we know this is where we're going to go, and this is how it's going to play out. And yeah, I can break this into small steps and I'll deliver them incrementally and iteratively. And the thing for me that's been the biggest journey, but I think the biggest payoff, is being less committed to a particular outcome. Recognizing that that's the direction I want to go, and I have all these things that I think I'm going to do to get there, but I need to be prepared mid-flight to go, actually, maybe there's not where I'm going. I'm going over there instead, and that will be just as good an outcome. And it's funny because that's one of the things that we teach when we teach agility in the large, that you need to be prepared that the goal is going to move. But somehow on a personal level, at least for me, it was a little bit harder to accept that, no, you know what, the goal is going to move, or I'm going to reframe the goal, and that's okay.
It's a little bit like you talked about your career, that you said, okay, I didn't have a master plan. I just adapted along the way. And then somebody asked or decision taken at the government or the Agile Alliance has at some point a change and they need some other role, and then you step in and these kind of things. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Adapting
It is that sort of thing, and that I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a plan, you shouldn't have goals. It's not like, oh, just go out and see what happens. But I used to be the kind of person who would be like, oh, okay, we're going to this place. So I'm going to plan out the trip. I'm going to know what train I'm going to be on. I'm going to look at what the options are for dinner. If the group is sort of ambivalent, I'm going to have a suggestion. And it's just, I've become a lot more laid back about that. And it's like, yeah, I want to get there. And that's probably the train that I want to take. But if that doesn't work out, there will be other ways. I will not get stressed about it. It will work out in the end. And it's funny. It's a little difficult to articulate because it's, as I said, I'm not suggesting, oh, just see what happens. But it's about being less, trying to control less. You want to have a clear idea of where you're going, but recognizing that circumstances are going to arise and things are not going to play out the way that you think, and being ready to work with that. And the biggest part of being ready to work with that is flipping the little switch in your head that says, I'm going to control how this happens.
Yeah, I really like, and also what you said in the beginning about options, that if you at the start say, okay, what are the options, then it's actually much easier to swap because you've already thought about some of the options.
Yeah.
Where typically we start about options and we select one thing, or we don't select anything and then we just go with the flow. But then, yeah, that usually is not as well. But yeah, really having some of the options, and yeah, like what Chris Matz would say in Real Options is about, okay, what's the last moment that I need to make that decision? What's the moment that I can say, okay, this is going this or that thing. That's yeah, but at the same time, like you say, on personal level, that usually is a lot harder. And somehow society has learned us that you need to pick one life, and then at least if my parents, when I hear them talking about their career paths, for example, that is indeed one or two things that they worked on and more or less the same thing the rest of their life. That's totally different for my age, and I probably think it's going to be even different for my children. But it's something that we need to learn as a human, or at least I needed to learn, and that's what I'm hearing with you. And do you have any ways, tricks that for people to learn this, or practices? How did you learn it?
Wow, that's a really good question, and I can't think of anything in particular that the only thing that helped me to get that was as I went on, as I went on my journey of becoming more agile, as I learned more about agility, because I started off by, I did Scrum training with Jeff Sutherland. I learned how Scrum works. And then I tried to bring that back into the teams that I was working with. And as I have deepened my knowledge of what it really means to be agile, that is part of what has enabled me to let go of that need for control. But I can't say that there was one defining experience or defining heuristic that allowed me to do that. It was sort of a gradual recognition of just understanding a little bit more. One of the things probably that really helped too was learning a little bit about complexity theory and understanding the difference between things that are, complicated versus complex, things that are deterministic, where if we always do this and we always do that, we'll always end up here. And learning more about, actually, no, this looks more like a system where you can't always count if A, then B will get to C, because there are too many other variables that are hard to identify or quantify or control. And so having the thinking tools to be able to recognize, so much more of life looks like this than looks like this, I think helped me come to grips with that fact that there's a lot less I can control than I think there is.
Yeah, and my addition to that would be, and especially the people are always complex, no matter how you think about it and how much. And then I think we talked earlier about labels. A lot of people use labels as a way to simplify things, but actually it's not. People are complex and they're not predictable in whatever way. Even if they say they're interested and want to go in a certain way, 5 minutes later they might have changed their ID. I might have changed my ID, and then it's actually good to say, wait a minute, let's re-talk over our options. It's not because we agreed this 10 years ago or whatever that we still like that in that sense. A lot of what you said reminded me of when I went to PSL with Jerry Wienberg, that he talked about every decision I took with my partner, I renegotiate, or I have to re-talk about it every 5 to 7 years, because our lives have been changing. You talked about finding back your balance once your children were out of the house. It's a completely different dynamic with just a partner and with one child, with two children, and so every time you need to rechange a little bit, and I think that's a similar kind of thing. We need to re-look at our options, and everything that worked fine with children in the house is probably up for grabs again. Do we really need to just keep living here? Could we do this or that? That's a completely different thing. So options really help with these kind of things. So thanks for sharing, because it's really, I think for a lot of people it can help. And it's also, I really like that you shared how difficult it is for you, because sometimes people look at they might look at you and say, oh, but Ellen has all figured it out, and that's a really nice career path, and then she even became the director of the Agile Alliance, so she must be a genius, all having a plan, all that. And what you're saying is, yes, I was jumping into some of these things and that worked out well. They had some challenges, but it was not a grand plan that you had 20 years ago about how you wanted to move into things. I think that's really important to share that kind of thing. Okay, I want to move to the next question about a book. What's a book? And I know that you prepared at least 2 books. So I don't know which one you want to talk about, or where you want to.
Well, I was going to say, one of the ones that I prepared, although I have to admit I haven't finished reading it, which is kind of terrible, but it ties into some of the things that we're talking about. I wanted to talk about David Marquette's book, Leadership is Language, The Hidden Power of What You Say and What You Don't, because he has been one of the people who I have been very influenced by in my career, because his story of, taking over command of the Santa Fe and realizing that he didn't know the things that he needed to know, and he had to invert that model of leadership in order to keep people safe and do what they needed to do. It's a style of leadership that really, I hate to use the word, really resonates with me. But I think in terms of enabling people, the model that he has built out of intent-based leadership is really powerful and really effective. And he did it in a container, like commanding a nuclear submarine. People don't think of that as a place where it's like, oh, we need to have some pretty strict controls in place. Yes, we do, because we're literally talking life and death. But also, we want to make sure that everybody who is on that crew, everybody who's in that circumstance, is enabled to make the best decisions possible. And isn't that what we want everywhere? When we're bringing a group of people together to do things, we want to make sure that people are enabled to make the best decisions possible for the outcomes that we're after. And that's what leadership as language is all about. He's talking about how, as leaders, we have the responsibility to be very aware of how the dynamics of the conversations that are happening, how the questions we ask, how the stance we take, how the expectations that we are either verbalizing or not verbalizing, but reinforcing through the way we talk to people, are going to shape the kind of environment we have. And I think that is a tool that we all have at our disposal, and not enough of us pay enough attention to. How the words that, it's funny because sometimes, we've talked about how words sometimes don't help to lead to shared understanding, but on the other hand, words are really important because they carry so much meaning, so much baggage, so much direction. And being really conscious of how we frame our interactions with other people is critical to building the kind of cultures that we want to build in order to enable everybody to make the best decisions. And when I'm thinking about, oh my gosh, how do I get people to understand that? I send them to read David's stuff.
I really like what you say. And yeah, his story is amazing, how he turned it from one thinking hat to 135 people that are thinking in a ship. That I really love it. We actually did a workshop. When was it? 2-3 days ago. On Thursday we did a workshop in our company using one of his videos, combining it with delegation poker to really have people think about, okay, what are the questions? What do you want responsibility? Because what David says, what I really like about his story is that, yes, he's distributing power on taking decisions, except for that one crucial thing about to pressing the button for launching missiles. So when it's life and death, he still says, I keep that, not because he doesn't trust the people, because he knows that there is the emotional a pressure of, okay, you need to decide on who to kill or something like that. And it's like, okay, I realize that is just the one thing that I need to stay with myself. And I really like how he's expressing all of these things, because indeed it's this book I haven't read. I read Turn the Ship Around. So, but what I'm hearing is that Turn the Ship Around is a lot about the story, about how he does it. What I'm hearing from you is a lot more about helping people. What are the kind of languages? What are the kind of words, and how to create that kind of environment? Should I see it like this?
That's a large part of it. In this book, what he does is it's a very practical book. Like it's based on the story of another maritime disaster. It tells the story of a shipping vessel that got into a catastrophe, and he uses that as the narrative to hang. You can see what's going on here because they had access to the tapes, they had access to the conversations, and he uses that as a framework to hang the story of, here's what we need to do to shift the conversations. You can see that this conversation happened, but it didn't have the outcome that would have led to a better ending, and here's the reasons why it didn't have that outcome. And so thinking about how do we change the questions we ask? How do we change the words that we use? And in this book, he offers a set of plays that people can use to start to shift the kind of conversations that they're having. It's not an Agile book per se, although as he's become more involved with the Agile community, he certainly uses some Agile examples in here and ties it to some Agile practices. But it's really about thinking about how do we shift how we think and how we talk about the complex problems that we're trying to solve at work, and do it in a way that enables better decision making, that is less deterministic. It's not about how do we, one of the first play is, it's not about following the clock, it's about controlling the clock. And one of the plays that he suggests is you also really need to build in a pause for reflection. And if you don't deliberately build in a pause, people won't take it. And so how do you structure an environment where you're still working towards deadlines, you're very aware, but you're using time differently without sounding like a science fiction movie. It's a very practical book in that sense. And it's one of the ones that as I get into working more specifically with leadership, I'm just so influenced by the way he phrases things, by the, again, analytical approach he takes to human behavior, but takes that and dissects it and provides some very practical guidance about, if you orient yourself this way rather than that way, you're going to enable your people to make better decisions, to tell you the things that you need to know, rather than having them follow your lead or look to you to lead all the time, lead in a very directive way all the time, because we know that doesn't necessarily work so well, but it's also really exhausting. Right? We want to share the decision making. We want to share the responsibility. We want to be able to pull on the knowledge of everybody in the organization, because that's how we're going to be better.
I really like that, and it sounds also that he's taking a lot of care, also creating that psychological safety for creating such or having this decision. So that's
well, and that's a lot of what the work in here is about. It's about how do you create an environment that has that, it still has the guardrails in place in the large, right? And it goes back to were you talking about how in Turn the Ship Around, he talks about which decisions he reserved for himself. There are still guardrails, but it's creating the safety within those guardrails that people will bring the information that is needed so that we don't have these terrible things happen. It's like when you dig into some of the disasters at NASA around the space shuttle explosions, you see some of the same dynamics at play. And this is a pattern we see time and time again when there are human catastrophes, right? Where people knew that bad things were going to happen if we went this way. But because of the way the system worked, because of the way people talked to each other, because of the way decisions that were made, at those decision points, we took the dumb decision because we didn't recognize the importance, or people didn't feel that they could overrule somebody who had more positional authority than them in the chain. And that's, we've learned that lesson so many times, and yet we failed to take it in.
Yeah, well, it's easy to see the lesson from others, but we don't realize always on our things. And so what I'm hearing is that David Marquez helps a lot with creating that language to make sure that we recognize a lot more of these. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I want to move to that next question about, that's one of the questions that I'm really looking forward to, is there a question that I didn't ask that you think I should also ask you? Is there something that a question that you think I should ask you?
So I can't think of a question that you should have asked me personally. So I'm going to pick on the question that I think we as agilists need to be asking ourselves, which is the what is coming next question. And I really think, because there's been lots of people in the community who have been sharing the message that, that Agile is dead. I mean, I was at one year at Agile India. That was the keynote that Dave Thomas gave. Agile is dead. What's next? But we've had enough experience. It's been 22 years now since the Agile Manifesto was created. We've had a lot of experience with trying to bring about change. A lot of people have had a lot of bad experiences along the way that they hold Agile accountable for. Whether it was because it was an Agile or not is a whole different conversation. But I think we as a community really need to think about what's coming next and what is going to be the way that we carry these ideas forward, maybe with losing some of the baggage we've accumulated along the way. Because there's no question these ideas are still important. There's no question that the ideas that are at the heart of agility still matter, that it's about how people relate to each other, that we need to not get confused with the map versus the territory, right? We need to do the work in order to see the results, not describe the work or what we're going to do. We need to, and if there's anything that the past couple of years has really illustrated, it's we need to be set up in a way where we can adapt to change, because the size, the magnitude of the changes that we've experienced over the past few years have been monumental. Like the shifts that were caused by the pandemic, some of the things that are going on politically at the moment, the effect of climate change on the world. There's a lot of big changes coming our way that are beyond our ability to predict or control. We need to be set up to work in a more disciplined way. So how are we as a community, how are we going to continue to bring those ideas forward, to put them into play, to help people become more adaptive? And the reason that I highlight this is because one of the recurring themes that I see amongst people in the Agile community, and I say this myself, is, when I go into clients, I don't talk very much about Agile anymore, because that tends to shut down the conversation. I talk about what are the goals that you're after? How are we going to organize to do this? How can we shorten feedback loops to figure out if we're on the right track? I'm putting all of those ideas into play.
But the word agile is maybe is not used as often. Yeah, I see that, definitely.
Yeah.
There is a lot there. And when you were talking the examples, that the big changes, for me, one of the things I've looked at in the pandemic was that I had the feeling, but I'm not sure if you share this, that's why I'm pointing it out, is that I had the feeling that a lot of agilists were much more prepared for changes because we know that things are changing. And I saw a lot of non-agilists looking for, I want stability and I don't like the change, and how do we get rid of the problem? It's like, no, it's actually more for me, it felt like more the opposite. I want people to much more understand that there is no certainty, that there is more things that are uncertain, and how do we deal with that? Because when you talk about political change, especially in the US, for example, there's a lot of things about against change and, we want to keep going back to old ways and whatever. No, the world is completely different. Is there something you see that where Agile can help us with these kind of things, or how do you see this?
I think where Agile can help us with these kind of things, there's no question that bringing sort of Agile thinking and Agile practices to how do we create more adaptability? How do we create more responsiveness? How do we make sure that we're focusing on the relationships between the people, rather than just trying to put processes into play to control how things work? That's where Agile thinking can still be very, very helpful. I think one of the challenges that we have, though, is, you talked about there's this swing that we're seeing in a number of domains of people trying to get back to the way it was and being certain about things. I think that's a natural human response to times of great change. We long for certainty. We long for the things we know, even if they weren't serving us really well. There's things that we recognize, and they reduce the cognitive load that we're carrying. And I think this is what we have to figure out how to work with. When there is so much change going on, when things are so volatile, and they're going to get increasingly volatile because that's the way the world is working, how do we help bring people on that journey to a place of, we're going to go to a different way of working. We're going to go to a different way of organizing ourselves and organizing our work. And it's not going to look like what you knew before, but here's where you can find the certainty in it. Here are the things that you can rely on in it. Because we have to give people some certainties to hang on to.
I really like that way of looking at these things. And I find it interesting is that, there's many people that talk, when I originally created the book version for this series, many of these questions were moving in all kinds of directions, where today, indeed, there's a lot more questions about the future of Agile. You talked about the keynote at Agile India. I think Joshua Kerievsky had the keynote last year at the big Agile conference, more like well, you should realize this is just the start of Agile, the start, because it looks like 20 years, but still IT has been going on for longer. The world has been going on for a lot longer. So yes, it's at the same time the end, and at the same time it's just the start. So there still is a lot that we need to learn and need to discover. So thanks for bringing again that attention and having that small little way on looking at that. And like you say, we as a community, we need to think really hard about that, and the answer is of course not ready yet. It will only in a couple of years that we'll understand this much more. Okay, I want to move, or do you want to add something to that?
No, I was just going to say, I think the challenge is we have to come together around it, right? That's where, as a community, we have to figure out where are we going together.
Well, I'm not sure we all need to go together, but at least we need some parts of it, and we need to figure out some other parts. I mean, for me, the Agile Alliance or the Agile community came together around something that came from the object-oriented thing, and some people moved into the Agile space, and others stayed late or stayed there or whatever. And I think that's a little bit, we gathered, we grew, we had other people, and some people didn't join, and I think that's also fine, but we need to figure out on big parts of it. I think that's at least how it feels to me.
Well, that's it. And I'll just say one more thing and we can move on. I'm not saying that we all need to be going in the same direction the same way. That doesn't make any sense. I also don't even think there's only one Agile community. There are many Agile communities, right? But there's got to be critical mass somewhere. There's got to be critical mass of shared ideas. There's got to be critical mass of people around some of those shared ideas. And it's finding where those points are at the moment. That's the challenge that I think we collectively, as people who have something to do with Agile, need to address.
Yeah, I like that. And like you say, well, you gave tons of examples of different kind of communities, like the game thing that you did online. There's so there's indeed, it's not just one community, it's multiple communities that sometimes feels as one, but it's multiple things. Okay, I want to move indeed to that next question, that who do you think I should ask next? Who's the person that you think I should invite for this?
Well, I think the person you should ask next, and I'm going to stick to it, is you should talk to Eric Laramé. And the reason I'm suggesting him, I mean, I know Eric, I'm not an impartial person. He's my business partner in Agile Partnership. But the reason that I think you should talk to Eric is he and Mathieu are having some really, really good conversations in the Agile community in Quebec in particular. They've started a podcast called The Sprinkler, where they're talking to a whole bunch.
Eric, and
that's Eric.
Sprinkler.
Yeah. And I think they're having some really, really, really interesting conversations. And I think Eric keeps a really low profile. He's not somebody who's out there. He's not somebody he does conference presentations, but not a whole lot of them, and not all around the world. But I think he's one of the people who is really making an influence on how we're carrying these ideas forward. And I think he would be a very interesting person to talk to.
Thanks for sharing that, because indeed that's I've said it already multiple times on the show. For me, there is multiple people that I would like to talk to. Indeed, some people think, oh, the Agile, it's just these 17 people who wrote the manifesto. No, for me, it's much broader. Like we already talked, the bigger discussions. And it's not just the big names these days. For me, it's also about the people who are the new people you talked about, April, earlier on. These are people more or less new to the community, or not everybody around the world knows them. This is the things that are changing in the future. And like you say, I would also like to talk to people who are maybe known in their little small community, have a huge impact there, but not everybody knows that. And I want to show a little bit the different kind of communities and different kind of people. So thanks for bringing that name to me, because that's exactly the kind of names I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So
thank
you very much.
Eric has been very influential in certainly building out the Agile community in Montreal and Quebec, but probably in a way a lot of people don't even realize that, oh, here's something he was involved in getting off the ground. Here's something that he's been doing. He was Agile Coach Camp Canada. He was very, very influential. Agile Coach Camp, we didn't talk about it during this interview, and I won't go on a long rant because I know we've been talking for a really long time already, but that's one of the events that to me was personally life-changing. I attended Agile Coach Camp in 2008, and it's the reason we're sitting here talking now for a whole variety of reasons. And, Eric was one of the people who was influential in getting Agile Coach Camp up and running in Canada as a recurring thing because of the effort he put into. We had an Agile Coach Camp Canada in 2010 in Waterloo. The next one was in Montreal in 2011. And just the spin-offs from that have been tremendous in the Agile community in Canada. And that's one of the things that Eric was very involved with. A lot of people probably don't even know that he did. And as I said, and the work that he's been doing with podcasts has been fabulous. And now he's going to be going, and when are we going to get you on the sprinkler? Because I haven't been there yet. But that's my fault.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because indeed, well, I think, I don't know, I've been to Agile Coach Camp, but then in Germany, and I think that was also a spin-off from Canada. I think Deborah Hartmann brought it to Europe. I'm not sure where she picked it up at one point, but it's definitely, it's big in Europe these days because of a spin-off that started somewhere there.
Well, so if you'll indulge me for 30 seconds for the history of Agile Coach Camp, Deb Hartmann and Naresh Jain put together the very first Agile Coach Camp in 2008 in Ann Arbor. And I ended up there accidentally. It was just literally as a result of a conversation the week before. And I'd just been laid off from a job, so I had some free time. And I ended up at this Agile Coach Camp, which was incredible. And then I'm assuming she brought it to Germany when she moved to Germany.
Exactly.
There wasn't an Agile Coach Camp in 2009 at all. And then in 2010, there was one in the US and one in Canada. And I don't know when the German one spun up. Might have been around then too. But that was, I think,
because I was working with Deb around that time. So that's why I think it was then.
Yeah, but it's in terms of one of the things in the Agile community that has had a huge amount of reach. Agile Coach Camp has been incredibly influential, and it's introduced a lot of people to the idea of open space, which I also think is a really, really powerful technology for organizing humans to do things.
Well, thank you for adding that little part of the history. And this is one of the extra reasons why I like to talk to you, because yes, we've been talking for a very long time, but you brought in things from different kind of things, a lot of history, a lot of, that's the advantage or disadvantage of talking to someone who has such a large knowledge and has been working for a long time with many people. So thank you for adding and spreading all that knowledge, because that's the other part for me about doing these conversations. It's also about making sure that we don't forget about that history, because indeed something like the Agile Coach Camp had a huge impact on a lot of people, and people don't always realize what these kind of events, and especially the open space format had in the community, that in Europe also had a lot of influence in multiple kind of directions. So thanks for doing that. So if I want to close up, if people want to connect to you, Ellen, what would be a good way to reach out to you?
The two easiest ways to find me these days are one on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn seems to be where a lot of the Agile conversation is happening these days. And honestly, the other way is if anybody wants to email me at ellen@agilepartnership.com, you can reach out to me that way. I'm not spending much time on Twitter anymore because Twitter is so
let's not talk about
so
that,
if anybody really wants to chat me up, find me on LinkedIn or drop me an email, and that's the best way to connect.
Thanks for sharing that. I didn't want to put an email address because that could be a little bit too easy to scrape, even if it's just on the screen. I'm a little bit worried about that, but that's why I wanted to use the LinkedIn one. But anyway, Ellen, it's been a wonderful time. It's all that I expected and a lot more, because indeed it's been a long time. We've been talking for a long time, but I really liked our conversation. So thank you for spending that time and spending your Sunday afternoon with me, basically, and with the rest of the world.
Well, it has been lovely to talk to you. I feel a little bit bad about how long we've been talking for, because in terms of a podcast or a recording, I'm thinking, wow, can you break this into chunks? We've been talking for a long time, but it's been a wonderful conversation.
It's yeah. In the beginning when I started, I thought a lot about making sure that I could copy and cut it into just the questions, and I decided not to do. The hard part is at this moment it's only on YouTube. I want to put it out on Spotify because it's a lot easier for people to on the road or something like that. But to be honest, I didn't want to spend the time this moment. It's already taking a lot of time just putting it out once a week.
Yeah.
So I definitely need help if I want to put it out somewhere on another platform. But I decided not to cut it out because it should feel really like the conversation that we had. And I had some feedback already from quite a few people that said, okay, it's long, but I really like it. Some people download it when they go running and stuff like that. So I'm going to keep that one conversation because it feels indeed like that conversation. Yes, it's long, but strangely enough, the longest one, the one that I did with GB Reinsberger, also Canadian, actually is not the least listened to. So it's not the top listened, that either, but it's also there's just more people listening to than some of the others, and actually, so the length apparently doesn't keep people from listening. And people, if you just look at the statistics, looks like they really listened right until the end, so it feels fine.
Interesting. Well, that goes. I was just going to say that goes back to that how people engage with online content is surprising.
Yeah, and it's against all the rules from podcasting and whatever, but for me it feels like this is the conversation that we're having, and apparently there's a lot of energy with me that I now have after this conversation, and I feel still a lot of energy from you. So I think it kind of radiates to the people listening in. So but if people disagree with that, feel free to add something in the comment and we'll learn about that. So thank you very much.
Indeed.
Okay, Ellen, I'm going to leave you, and we can I'm sure that we'll meet again in a later moment. So bye-bye.
Indeed. Thanks, Yves. It's been lovely talking to you.
Same here. Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.